tall man who was in Becky's slides that you saw earlier at the announcement of Meatless Mondays at some of our city schools. And in the spirit of the pact, I wanted to offer some reflections. 4 years is actually a lot. It's a very big commitment that a lot of cities have made, and we continue to have additional cities come in. And we're going to be doing some talking tomorrow, and some of my intention is to set up some of the conversations we're going to have about the value of frameworks, some of the conversations we might have about what success looks like, and what specific levers that cities can use to make change. There's been a lot of conversation already about what is the role of cities, and certainly that conversation about what cities can do and need to do is connected to the conversation about what success looks like for cities. So I want to share some reflection on that, hopefully to spark conversation either now or in side conversations as we move through the day. So that just basically said all that. I should say in this context something about her sign. This is a demonstration that one of the many demonstrations that's been occurring in New York and across the United States since the election of our current president. And in the Vietnam War, the phrase carpet bombing gained currency. Lisa probably remembers this. It was a military strategy, and it was an indiscriminate and destructive strategy. And her sign says that women, if women were in charge, women would carpet bomb the world with groceries. And the clicker would work. Okay, there we go. Her sign says, hope means being part of change. It means not waiting on elected officials or mayors to put a grocery store in my community, but making a grocery store out of my corner or liquor store. So I want to say something about our approach to policymaking in New York City. It is absolutely community-driven, and we don't always believe that we are the be-all, end-all of what should happen in each community. As I think everybody knows here, how many of you have been to New York City ever? Yeah, good, almost half of the audience. It's a very large and dispersed collection of neighborhoods and a very dense city. And when I hear people talking about different cities, I kind of sometimes feel a little like I wish I was in a smaller city. You could see what you were, really accomplishing maybe a little bit easier. But we have the city we have, and we love our city. And we have a lot of great community organizations and advocates in our cities. We have done something a little different. We do not have a food policy council. I could talk at length about why that's true, but we do not. Our food policy is absolutely community informed, however, because of the dispersed number of agencies that we have working on this issue. And we have at least 11 agencies that in some way touch food policy and food delivery in New York City. Our food policy, we do count things. We count a lot of things. But our challenge is we don't know what the upper number is. I don't know, even though I know how many community gardens we have and how many fresh food bodegas and how many other kinds of initiatives, how many health bucks we're distributing, nutrition incentives. I don't know what the number is that would be sufficient. I don't know what success would look like if I'm only counting things. And so we tend to focus on things that are larger scale. The other thing I'll say about this, is about frameworks, because we're talking a lot about frameworks here, is rather than have a separate framework that exists independent of, and again, none of this is saying that you're doing it wrong. I'm just saying what we're doing. Rather than have an independent framework, our policy indicators follow basically the frameworks that you're seeing in all the areas that you've seen so far, if you were here yesterday and certainly today. But it is integrated into our larger city, One NYC strategic plan. And that's very key. That's the long-term plan that touches on what we're doing to manage. It's a 25-year plan. It is written into the law that the mayor has to do this, so it will always be there. It is a long-term plan for managing growth, making sure the city's practices are sustainable, the city is resilient, and the city is equitable. And it is the current mayor, Mayor de Blasio, that added the equity component. And it has real teeth because each of us had to come up with larger goals and strategies for the work that we're doing that are related to all those pieces of the framework. And we have specific indicators and objectives and projects that are part of that plan. And each of those is tracked to ensure sustainability. So it does, or to ensure accountability, so that it is not a pie in the sky document. If we have not accomplished one of our initiatives, and one of the big ones that I was managing was making sure that we finally got agreement, a very large political and practical agreement to do free lunch in all of the schools in New York City. That gets flagged if we're falling behind, and then that kicks it up to a level in the mayor's office where it becomes a priority. Where am I aiming this? There we go. So let me also then talk about the synergy that our policy and framework has with the New York City, or with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. So we were asked by Mayor Pisapia, who's, if you've never met him or seen him, he's the guy in the middle there, to be part of the development and to bring the lessons of New York City to the development of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. And we're very proud that our mayor, we're one of the signatory cities of the pact. And that effort, not working, there we go. That effort was absolutely synergistic with our One NYC planning. And this is just a simple slide to show you that the general framework of the pact, which is in several areas, this is not an exclusive list. A lot of our priorities map to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, whether that's the way we do procurement and what we procure, our nutrition incentives programs, and you can read the list here. We do have a regional food infrastructure project going with our state. It is not easy, but since people have talked about that, I feel confident that we are making progress there. And so a lot of these priorities and initiatives that have happened in the 4 years. They either represent new initiatives or expansion of existing initiatives that are part of our work in New York. I'd like to also spend some time, having talked a little bit about frameworks, to talk about what we think about in terms of measuring success. We have a very strong focus, as I said earlier, on racial and economic equity in our policies, which undergirds a lot of our work in doing food justice work. That means that equal access for all New Yorkers to healthy food is our signature goal. We are, regardless of income and regardless of race, we have a segregated city in large measure that goes back to a lot of our early policies, redlining that was done in New York City in the 1940s, and is perpetuated by some other land use decisions that have been made. And that's where we have a lot of what was referred to earlier as food swamps. So big challenges there. When we do this, we define our intended beneficiaries. So that's why I talked to you about the equity agenda, because the intended beneficiaries of almost exclusively all of our policies are people who, for various reasons, have been marginalized in the food system or in a healthy food system, don't have any ownership, don't have any real recognition, and don't have as much economic clout. The outcomes, when we think about them, are observable changes that can be attributed to our efforts, and that's a bar that is very strict. And so as much as we know that the work we're doing on all of our initiatives is contributing to a better city, it is often hard to figure out exactly what our initiatives, we feel really good about them, but it may or may not be moving the needle on obesity, for example, in a larger sense. Yeah, I think just as a rule, we like to work out of this sort of theory of change, if you will, where we have these long-term measures of success. But we really need to be able to articulate for policymakers and certainly for the budget people what the short-term benefit of those programs are. So you've got, back to an earlier question, you have the mayor looking for those long-term big goals, big accomplishments, big announcements, and often the success steps along the way. In order to get them funded and supported and to be able to see our progress, we need to also focus on being able to define what the short-term outcomes are on the way to that bigger success. There we go. Here's a couple of examples, and I realized on the way over here that my slide is slightly incomplete, but you'll figure that out in a minute. So for example, if we have a long-term outcome of decreasing the number of households that are food insecure in New York City, we have a project right now. We don't think food banks are the be-all, end-all, or food pantries are the be-all, end-all to solving the hunger problem, but it is the last resort for a lot of families in New York City who suffer from food insecurity from time to time, and sometimes more often than not. And so we've identified a metric called the food supply. We've taken the number of missing meals, which is a calculation we use that's an economic calculation. We break that down into neighborhoods. We figure out how much food supply is going from the multiple suppliers of emergency food, so-called emergency food in New York. And we figured out on a neighborhood-to-neighborhood base what the gaps are, and we have a commitment to getting 50% of the meal gap resolved in the next 5 years, and to get that supply up to 50%. I don't think we'd want to fill in the gap just with all, sorry, that was a little bit quick, but that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. We'll skip to this slide pretty quickly. When we think about our strategies and focusing on strategies, my time is up. Holy moly. So just to say that the last point